Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover was well into his twilight years when the tragic news broke. Hoover skipped the funeral and services at the Capitol, sending his sons in his place. Instead, Hoover penned a heartfelt letter to Jackie Kennedy, offering his deepest sympathies. Hoover and Kennedy had crossed paths several times over the years, from early introductions by Joe Kennedy to encouraging letters during JFK's health battles. Hoover kept up correspondence with Jackie, maintaining that connection until he passed away himself, just 11 months later, at the age of 90. Harry S. Truman. Harry S. Truman, the straight-talking former president, had his fair share of doubts about JFK during the 1960 Democratic primaries. He wasn't shy about his concerns, especially about Kennedy's inexperience and his strong dislike for Joe Kennedy's influence. But despite those early reservations, Truman was deeply shaken by JFK's assassination. Upon hearing the news, Truman didn't hold back his sorrow, calling Kennedy a good man and an able president who had done a solid job in tough times. Dwight D. Eisenhower, JFK's immediate predecessor, who was at a United Nations meeting when the news hit. The assassination clearly rocked him, leading him to issue a statement condemning the despicable act that had taken the president's life. Eisenhower shared the nation's grief, but his words also reflected the personal loss he felt. Their relationship had been complicated. Eisenhower, the humble farm boy, resented the Kennedy family's wealth and the role of TV in crafting JFK's image, while Kennedy had his own critiques of Eisenhower. Despite these tensions, they had managed to build a working relationship during JFK's presidency. Lyndon B. Johnson. Lyndon B. Johnson was thrust into the presidency in the most dramatic and traumatic way possible. Riding just 2 cars behind Kennedy in the motorcade, Johnson was quickly shoved to the floor by a Secret Service agent as the first shot echoed through Dealey Plaza. Moments later, he was whisked onto Air Force One, where, amid the chaos and shock, he took the oath of office right there on the plane. It was a bold move, meant to project confidence and stability to a nation in panic, but it also marked the beginning of Johnson's complex and often contentious relationship with Kennedy's legacy. Formally, Johnson went out of his way to show respect and remorse. In his first speech to Congress, he called Kennedy the greatest leader of our lifetime and pledged to carry on his legacy. He penned heartfelt letters to the Kennedy children and offered Jackie and her kids the option to stay at the White House as long as they needed. But behind the scenes, it was no secret that Johnson and Kennedy had never been best buddies. They represented not just different factions of the Democratic Party, but also different worlds. Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon was in Dallas just the day before the assassination, attending a business meeting with Pepsi-Cola officials, where he didn't hold back in criticizing many of Kennedy's policies. On the day of the assassination, Nixon flew back to New York, unaware of the tragedy that was about to unfold. While in a taxi, he got the news in a rather surreal way. A pedestrian walked up to the driver, rambling about the president being shot. By the time Nixon arrived at his residence, he was visibly shaken. Sure, he could have been rattled by the loss of Kennedy, but it's likely his mind was racing with other fears as well. One fear that kept Nixon on edge was the thought that he might have been a target too, as he kept repeating to a friend how he was just in Dallas. The day after the assassination, Nixon made a public statement, urging the nation to honor Kennedy's memory by reducing the hatred that drives men to such terrible deeds. In fact, just weeks before the assassination, Kennedy had even called Nixon from the same hotel to say hello when they realized they wouldn't get a chance to meet in person. Their relationship wasn't always so cordial, especially after their heated presidential battle, but Nixon's memoirs, published years later, capture the complexity of their connection. He wrote that while they were too different to become close friends, they maintained an amicable relationship during their early careers. Nixon also penned a letter to Jackie Kennedy offering his condolences. However, on November 24th, the same day he made his public statement, Lee Harvey Oswald was assassinated while in police custody. Nixon, ever the pragmatist, said that while Oswald deserved to die, he still had the right to a trial, calling the killing despicable. Gerald Ford. At the time of JFK's assassination, Gerald Ford was a congressman from Michigan. He was attending a lunch meeting when he got the news. Ford was deeply shaken, as he had admired Kennedy's leadership and charisma. His reaction was one of solemn reflection, understanding that the nation had just lost a dynamic leader in the prime of his life. Ford would later serve on the Warren Commission, which was tasked with investigating the assassination, a role that added a layer of complexity to his personal grief. Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was a peanut farmer and a Navy veteran at the time, nowhere near the political scene that would later define his life. He was living in Plains, Georgia, when he heard the news. Carter was deeply saddened by Kennedy's death, as he had been inspired by JFK's New Frontier and his call for public service. For Carter, the assassination was a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the volatility of politics. Ronald Reagan, then a washed-up Hollywood actor, was transitioning into politics when JFK was assassinated. Reagan admired Kennedy's communication skills and his ability to connect with the American people, something Reagan himself would later master. When the news broke, Reagan was horrified. He would later say that the assassination was a wake-up call to the dangers of the political stage, where even the most beloved leaders could be struck down in an instant. George H.W. Bush. George H.W. Bush was in Texas when Kennedy was assassinated, running for the U.S. Senate. Like many, Bush was stunned by the news, and it cast a shadow over his campaign. Although Bush was a Republican, he respected Kennedy's service to the country and understood the magnitude of the loss. He later reflected on how the assassination had changed the political landscape, making it a more dangerous and unpredictable arena. Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was a high school student at the time of JFK's assassination, and like many young people, he was inspired by Kennedy's youthful energy and idealism. When he heard the news, Clinton was devastated. He later recalled watching the news coverage in disbelief and feeling a deep sense of loss. JFK's death only strengthened Clinton's resolve to pursue a career in public service, a path that would eventually lead him to the White House. George W. Bush. George W. Bush was just a teenager when JFK was assassinated. He was at school in Texas when the news broke. Like many Americans, Bush was shocked and saddened by the event, though at his young age, he might not have fully grasped the implications at the time. As he grew older and entered politics himself, Bush would come to understand the significance of that tragic day in American history. Barack Obama was just 2 years old when JFK was assassinated, so he doesn't have any personal recollections of that day. However, as he grew up, JFK became one of Obama's political heroes. He admired Kennedy's vision, his rhetoric, and his ability to inspire a nation. When Obama eventually became president, he often invoked JFK's legacy in his speeches, reflecting on the impact Kennedy had on his own path to the White House. Donald Trump. Donald Trump was 17 years old and attending the New York Military Academy when Kennedy was assassinated. Trump has said little about his reaction to the event, but given his future career in politics and love of the spotlight, it's safe to say that he understood the gravity of what had happened. The assassination of a president was a reminder of the unpredictable nature of fame and power. Two things Trump would become very familiar with later in life. Joe Biden. Joe Biden was a 21-year-old college student when JFK was assassinated. He was deeply impacted by the news, as Kennedy had been a major inspiration for his own political ambitions. Biden has often spoken about how JFK's call to public service resonated with him, and how the assassination solidified his desire to pursue a career in politics. For Biden, JFK's death was a personal loss as much as it was a national tragedy.